Golden Gate Park. A night heron.
A night heron?
Yes.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Hi everybody. Our next speaker is Ken Knabb. Ken Knabb is probably most known for his translations of the work of Gita Board and Situations International. He's also written his own books, Public Secrets, on the relevance of Rexroth, and he requests that we get closer. So fill in the seats closer to the stage because he wants to have more of a interactive kind of discussion thing. So I'll give you a second to do that, and then I introduce you to Ken Knabb. Thank you.
Can you hear me if I talk like this? Or should I? You want a chair now? You can sit.
Nah.
Thank you for coming. Since we have a very short time, I'm just going to say about 2 or 3 minutes worth about myself, my trajectory, and then open it up for questions. So I was from Missouri originally and went to college in Illinois and came out to Berkeley in 1965 and was involved in the New Left and countercultural things of the 60s, which I'm sure you all have heard about if you weren't there. And if you weren't there, it was really fantastic. And around 1969 or 70, I discovered the Situationists. I was an anarchist at that time. And so by way of the anarchists, I was reading about May 1968, the revolt in France, and heard about that the Situationists were a little group that had been influential in triggering that, so I looked into them and was blown out. Hi, Renee. And good to have you here. So then I checked out some Situationist pamphlets in Berkeley and wanted to read more, but it was all in French. So I taught myself French and went to France to meet some of these folks. And some of them came to Berkeley and to visit me and my friends. And during the 70s, we had a lot of little groups and little agitations and scandals and so on. And eventually my French got good enough that I could translate the Situationist texts into English. So around 1981, I came out with this collection of called the Situationist International Anthology. This is actually an updated expanded version. And then over the same years, I was writing my own stuff, including a little book about Kenneth Rexroth, various leaflets and pamphlets and so on. And in the 90s, I wrote an autobiography called Confessions of a Mild-Mannered Enemy of the State, and another text called The Joy of Revolution, which sort of summed up my ideas on that topic and the Situationists. And those things were published in this book called Public Secrets, 1997. And starting in 1998, I had a website called Bureau of Public Secrets. And so all these things are there. And if you aren't already familiar with the website or on my email list, I have a table in there which you can check out later where you can look at these writings and sign up on that. My latest significant work is co-translating and editing this book called In the Crossfire, Adventures of a Vietnamese Revolutionary, which is about a non-Stalinist revolutionary who I knew in Paris, who died at the age of 92 just a few years ago. It's about his experiences in the 30s and 40s in Vietnam. A very interesting book. And in the past, when people have asked me to speak here, I've always refused. And similarly, when people want me to do book signings and interviews and so on, I've tended to refuse over the decades. But just recently, I've been kind of letting up on that a little bit and seeing how it goes. So I think we can just take it from here. One reason that I have hesitated to do these public appearances is that a lot of times it seems that things get trivialized, that people show up and there's this big division between the audience and the speaker, and it's just like, is this guy a star, or is this guy boring, or I don't like him as well as him, or it's kind of a passive thing where people are there's something significant, obviously, when you see people in person. You can get a little idea of what they're like. But on the other hand, sometimes by focusing on that, you forget, well, what are they saying? And in these different things, I've addressed different things that I think are significant, that you, as well as me and other people, I think might bear in mind, might look into. And so I feel gratified if after somebody's met me or read something, then they think, oh, that gives me something to think about. That's challenging to me in some way. And not so gratified if I'm just being compared with some other person. Oh, he's more interesting than this other guy. So from here on, I'd like to just go into questions, but since we don't have very much time, try to keep the questions very short. Anything longer than 15 seconds is probably more of a spiel than a question. And I'll try to keep my answers very short. So, any questions? Jerry?
I was just, you're the one that turned me on to Kenneth Rexroth, and then reading about the Situationists, and even reading about Govan, you get this this really strong sense of this opening in history, and this sense of like many different things were possible. Like for Rexroth, it was like the early 1900s in Chicago. For the Situationists, it was Paris in the 60s, and then for Govan, it was like the 30s in Vietnam. And I just want to know more about those moments and people's experiences at those moments. And reading these kind of stories coming out from Egypt and Tunisia and even Libya, it's like very, very exciting. You get this immediate sense of like so much being possible. So I just want to hear more stories like that from you or anyone else who care to share an experience or something that they've read where they get that sense of something big opening up that a lot of people could be a part of in the immediate.
I understand your taste for those. I have the same taste, and it's quite understandable. But I would also say that it's possible to be too excited about that kind of thing, so that becomes another spectacle or another trap, where you're so fascinated with what was going on in Chicago during the Roaring '20s or these other things, that you forget that we're in the Roaring Teens right now, or whatever. We don't really know where we can see that we're in some unfavorable and some favorable aspects, but it may be that if humanity survives, somebody in 2075 is going to say, man, it was so great back there in the Bay Area and around 2012, or there's something to be said for looking at what we are doing and not worrying quite so much like, is it not as good as the past or not as good as in that other country? So that's just another thing to bear in mind. Those other things can be inspirational. They may give us some ideas of what's possible, but they can also distract us. you know, from right here. Yes?
How do you see the connection between anarchy and
Anarchy and Buddhism. Well, I've written a couple pieces which you can find on my website. One of them is in Public Secrets, the other was since then, where there are some Buddhists who in recent years have become more politically engaged. They're called socially engaged Buddhists. And a few of them may have anarchist tendencies. Gary Snyder is an example. But most of them are kind of, part of my critique is that they weren't really very radical. But I think that there is those two things can go together. Yes?
In response to that, I was wondering if you've read any of the stuff by Tikkun, which sort of refers to Buddhism and its detachment from the self and identity, and then refers that to an anarchist project of the same kind.
I've read a little bit of Tikkun, but not the things you're talking about, but sounds like there might be something there. During the 1970s, what American city had the most situations? Well, the SI had a small section in New York of 4 people, and of course there was a circle of people around them there. So that would be the initial one, like 1967, 68, 69. And starting a little after that, there was a little group in the Massachusetts area, and then some people who I knew went to Massachusetts and New York and came back here in the Bay Area around 1970. And probably from 1970 on, there were a lot more people in the Bay Area, groups I was in.
Do you have a sense as to how the future is in some sense predictable, or revolution or something may change, or do you feel that it's kind of events may happen that we are not aware of and in no sense can see coming?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of unpredictable things. You know, you have to. One reason you can know that is that a lot of things happen, and you look around and say, "Who predicted this?" Well, like take these Egypt and Tunisia things. Anybody who was sort of aware could have said, "Well, there's a lot of seething undercurrent," but you could have said that same thing 20 years ago too. You don't really know why at a particular time. So somebody who wants to make change has to keep both things in mind. You have to look as much as you can in theoretical things and say, well, this is comparable to that. But you have to be aware that unexpected things are going to happen and be ready to pounce on that opportunity, because they don't last very long.
Who are the Situationists again?
What are they?
Who are they?
Who are they? That's sort of a long story, but the name comes from their idea of desiring to create situations rather than works of art. This was in the 50s in France and a few other places in Europe, and these were people who had come out of a background of Dadaism and Surrealism, which had revolutionary intentions, but failed. And they were looking back and saying, well, this just ended up being some paintings in museums. And they attributed that failure to the fact that they were still focusing on making works of art. In other words, something delineated in a space or in time or something. And so they sort of hypothetically said, we want to create something that's open-ended, that you can't put a frame around. You can't say it's going to be on this day and going to be over. So that was what the term situationist meant. To find out more, you want to look into, in this anthology in particular, you can see the early writings, when they're kind of developing and the different changes the group goes over time. Yes?
To what extent, or